Hello and welcome to My Personal Professional Life. This is the podcast that helps you build the life you want. We are your hosts. Beth, that's
Oh,
your cue.
Beth Messich Coaching and Consulting.
And I am Greggy Amisial from Activating You. We are two learning experts who are trying to motivate, trying to challenge, and trying to get us to integrate our personal and professional lives and discuss all the spaces in between.
Greggy and you and I send posts and memes and stuff back and forth to each other. And there was an Instagram post I sent you, I don't know, a month or so ago. It's from someone who says that he is pioneering the future of work. And I have it pulled up on my phone. It's multiple screens, but the way that the post starts out is the harsh reality is that how you spend your 20s will make or break your future.
Yeah.
And my reaction to that when I read it was like a flashing WTF sign in my head because when I think about my 20s, and just to be clear, like I'm not Gen Z, despite my Jewy complexion and joy, youthful joie de vivre. I'm Gen X. And when I look back on my 20s, if I had thought, well, it's make or break it time, number one, I would be paralyzed. Number two, I would be screwed at this point because my 20s were really a time where I was figuring things out. And so that was kind of when I sent that post to you was like, what is this dude talking about?
Well, the only thing that lets me know that you're not Gen Z is that you said joie de vivre. Like that was not... You would have said, the fact that I'm so lit, that would have been different. But you said joie de vivre, and that was a true tell. But I love that we send these messages back and forth. And when we were sending this one back and forth, it kind of got us thinking about a couple of things in the spaces that we encounter all the time. Namely, the big one of the biggest ones probably in the learning and development space, which was growth mindset, right? So today we're going to take some time and talk about both that quote, all the visceral and emotional things that came from that, but we're going to talk about that in the frame of growth mindset. Namely, we're going to talk about the difference between a growth and a fixed mindset. We're going to talk about how you cultivate a growth mindset, which is super important in any of the spaces that you are, personal and professional. And finally, we're going to talk about how we deal with people who may not have the same growth mindset, and they might drag you down. So we're going to talk about how we can work within those as well. Today, this is going to be discussed all throughout things, but as we do every time, we're going to talk about the ins and outs of growth mindset, and we're going to try to offer you some actions to help you immediately build momentum towards the personal and professional life that you want to lead. And we'll do that today based on our two sponsors. Our first sponsor, Beth.
Yeah, Beth Messich Coaching and Consulting. So I work with companies to build their leadership pipelines for the future.
And Activating You, a company that's focused on wellness. We hope to help people learn about their wellness, about their best selves, and activate that through identifying their priorities, aligning their habits, and building systems that allow them to replicate those habits consistently. So that's what we're here representing, and that's what we're here to talk about. First, we're going to talk about, again, a little bit that post. So, Beth, when you sent it to me, I thought it was interesting because I also follow this gentleman, and we're not going to call him out, but we both were probably following him for similar reasons. There are a lot of quotes that he has that feel like really poignant, very to the point. I like to, follow people that are giving positive messages, so I'm trying to fuel my mind with those kinds of things. And I think, a lot of his messages before we started to look at them with some skepticism, were more in a positive light. There were a lot of them that had to do with things like what felt like having a growth mindset, having like a get to it kind of attitude, right? Even some of the posts I looked at it like, oh, Activating You, we should make some more posts sort of like these. And when this one came, it kind of stopped me in my tracks. Now, I'm not in my 20s. Okay. So maybe as he, reading it, I'm looking at it and saying, oh gosh, what is he saying about someone in their 20s when he says it that way? I think the first thing he says is, again, that line, harsh reality. If you don't spend your time wisely in your 20s, basically you make or break your future. And that was a hard pill to swallow. One, because I know what I did in my 20s, and I don't know that I was spending it doing all of the best things that would make my future. But I think I turned out okay. He did call out that there are outliers, right? But one of the things he was saying was basically the later you get in life, your habits become harder to break. And if you haven't put in play opportunities for compound interest, either in the things that you do, that where you spend your time and invest it, then you're going to have a hard time building the future that you want going forward. And it was a tough read, and also one I think is not really true. So that was where sort of my mind came into it. What were your thoughts outside of the initial one? When you gave it a little further look, what did you see?
Yeah, no, it was really, it was along the same lines as you. And when you go through the post, he says, the solution is simple. There are three ways to future proof yourself. You build your body, you build your mind, you build your business. Okay, great. But the idea that you either do that in your 20s and set yourself up for success, or you don't, it's kind of fatalistic. And I think that's why growth mindset really came to mind. It Great, you're a spin instructor, right? And so amongst the like million other things that you do, like,
Too
can
many
you
things.
imagine someone brand new walking into your class who, are not in their 20s, who's like, hey, you can get engaged, they're somewhere in their 30s or 40s, and they say to you like, hey, I've never done spin before, I haven't really gotten into a fitness routine, so I'm going to start today. Can you imagine looking at them and being like, sorry, 20-year-olds,
Yeah.
like, you're done?
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine?
Yeah, if you really didn't work on this in your 20s, you're probably not going to make it. No, one, I like my classes full, so I would never do that. Two, I've come to learn that the most dedicated people in those spin classes are actually the people 40 and above. They really show up and show out. And that's no diss to the Gen Zers who are in there and get into it and maybe fall out of it. But I think there's a difference in people who start to understand what serves them. And as you get older, that maturity allows you to start to filter some of those things out maybe a little bit better. And I give them credit for calling out like, hey, there's a space where you need to filter. Where I bring back the idea of growth mindset is the fatalistic part of what you called out is that idea of like, hey, if you haven't done this, then there's no chance to fix it or reset it or whatever else. I also think it's sort of immature to just, think about the one percenters, right? The very few people who that just in their 20s kind of knew exactly what they
Yeah.
wanted to do and were able to kind of go right at it. I give those people a lot of credit. My wife, I give her credit for this all the time. She kind of knew what she wanted to do really early. In high school, she had a mentor that was working with her towards the career that she wanted to have. She then went to school and then got her master's, like right through her path kind of followed her where she wanted it to be and wanted to go. But she was able to scope that out earlier. My life was sort of opposite. Jack of all trades, knew a lot of things, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. So in my 20s, I switched majors. I started a business with my friends. I failed at that and, tried something else. And then when I started to figure out what I wanted to do, it was in my 20s, but, later in my 20s. So now, did I just waste the first 6 or 5 years of that math? Like, did I mess that up? No, I lived. And in the living, you learn a lot of lessons. And in the failing, right, you learn more lessons. And that's where that growth mindset part of it comes in. And that's why I love that you kind of tied this to the idea of growth mindset. We should probably define growth mindset now and kind of give people a sense of why we think it made so much sense to bring it in. And if you haven't heard the term growth mindset, I'm going to let Beth define it for you so you get a sense of exactly why we thought it was important to talk about.
Yeah. So there's this idea of growth mindset and fixed mindset. So growth mindset is the idea, it's the view that intelligence, abilities, and talents are learnable, that you have the capacity to get better with application, with practice and effort over time. A fixed mindset is, this is as smart as I'm ever going to get. This is as talented as I'm ever going to get. Um, and so this is it. This is as good as it's going to get. So that breeds certain behaviors, right? So someone with a growth mindset, if I feel like I can get better at things, like I'm going to embrace challenge, I'm going to see effort as a way to get better, to a path to mastery. I welcome feedback because it's going to only help me get better, and I find inspiration in other people's success. Someone with a fixed mindset, it's entirely opposite. Like, challenges are no good. Like, this is as good as it gets. Like, don't challenge me. You're just going to prove that I can't do something. Effort's fruitless, feedback's pointless, and anybody else who's successful, that's a threat, right? And so I think, and Greg, you and I, we worked at the same company for a long time, and there was a point probably almost 10 years ago where, in the learning and development space that we were working in that company, we really embraced growth mindset actually as a core philosophy for the
Yeah.
company. And we used Carol Dweck's book Mindset as a foundation for that. So just a quick resource for people. That's really, I think, we're certainly where I while I think when I look back, I think I've had a growth mindset.
Yeah.
That's where it really started to take shape for me and really start
Yeah.
understanding what it
What
is.
I loved about Carol Dweck's work was that she was able to define something that has already kind of been in existence. And I think the people who are able to weaponize common sense is one of the things I think about are really smart. Um, the idea that failure is a part of the process actually makes for more gains. It makes for more wins. I love sports. I bring up sports metaphors all the time, but one of the places that you can learn the most about sports is not during the game. It's after the game. It's in post-game interviews and conversations with coaches. Phil Jackson, although he was a great coach, some of his writings are even greater because his coaching philosophies are lined with messages like growth mindset and understanding. LeBron James talks about, I think last year, in almost every time they took a loss, he just talked about growth mindset, and it would use the words, you have to have a growth mindset. You have to start to understand where your learnings are coming from and where they're going to. So those things that other people are looking at from like Dweck's work allow us to see that, hey, this thing that has either existed has now been defined. And once you've defined it, there's an opportunity for you to strengthen your skill around having it. That's why I think this growth mindset idea and concept is adopted by a ton of companies, because once you can be clear and say, hey, there's a way to win more, it starts in the mind. And if we can train ourselves to be more growth mindset than fixed mindset, we have opportunities. One of the things that we can call out now is that it's not one-to-one. It's not like I'm either growth mindset or I'm fixed mindset, right? We span the what do you call that? We span the going back and forth between growth and fixed mindset depending on the thing. Recently, I had a conversation about growth mindset, and I was asking someone, hey, if I asked you at your age right now, could you learn to do a backflip? What's your first response? And they were like, hell no, right? Hell, that no is fixed mindset. But I bet you with the right training, right, with the right practice and being able to fail a bunch of times, you could eventually figure out how to backflip. Now, they challenged that. They said, I'm 40 plus, my body's not doing that right now. But it's that first initial, I couldn't do that. I'm not that smart, or I've never been a math guy, right? Those things that are sort of like, we shut off the opportunity and possibility at the beginning. When if we switched our mindset a little bit and said, yeah, maybe I could with the right training, or that could happen with some time and with some learning. That's the difference between growth and fixed. And you find that businesses and people who adopt that growth mindset, that leave the possibility for them to learn, gain more in the end. And that's why it's important.
Well, and I think a key thing there is two key things with your person who could they do the backflip or not is both desire and what's the word that I want, application, right? Or so do they actually want to do a backflip? Like, number one, like if you to ask me, can I do a backflip today? Like, no. Um, if the second question is, do you want to? Well, not really. But let's say the answer is yes. Okay, great. So the answer is yes. Then what would it take? Like, I need to learn to do it. I need to build the strength. I need to do whatever, right? So I think when we talk about like, it's not you either are a growth mindset or you're not. Um, you're absolutely right. I think it depends on the task, and there's like, or the task or the goal or whatever you want to call it. And I think the desire is really important there. Like, I don't really want to do a backflip, but I want to make sure that right now I get in 11,000 steps a day. And my goal is to probably next year bump that up to 12,000. That there's a desire there. Can I figure it out? Can I do it? I mean, yeah, absolutely. Because it's both the growth mindset and the desire.
I love that. I love that. Then if we now that we're talking about the idea of how, or at least broaching the concept of like where people can win and lose with having a growth versus a fixed mindset, how do you cultivate it? Let's talk about that a little bit. Let's get into the space of thinking of, hey, now I understand that this thing exists. I know that there's text about it, and the sports players talk about it, and the coaches talk about it. How can I make this thing a part of my life? Help me get there, Beth.
Well, one of the things that we talk a lot as coaches that we just talk a lot about is noticing, like noticing our own behaviors. Like we go around the entire day like doing things, and we are conscious of what we're doing, or semi-conscious sometimes of what we're doing, but like actually noticing the why behind the decisions that we're making. And really start to dig in and explore that a little bit more. So, the example that I always give to people is no one got fired because there had to be more than one version of the iPhone, right? We're on what, iPhone 14, 15? I've even
Yeah,
lost track.
that's a good one.
It's iterative. It's an right? And the idea is continuous improvement. Now,
Yes.
that doesn't mean that iPhone 1 was trash and they never should have created it, because there's now an
I
iPhone, well,
mean,
there's a better version now, right? But like, it doesn't mean that there never should have been version 1. If there was never version 1, there wouldn't be version 14.
right.
So I think really kind of part of cultivating is noticing the way that we respond to things, both the way that we react to things that happen to ourselves and the way that we react to things that we see happen to others. You're on LinkedIn and you see someone who puts up a post that says like, "Oh, I'm open to work. I lost my job," which is really super common right now. Like, what is your reaction to that? Is your reaction, "Oh, wow, I don't know that they're ever going to find a better job. Oh, I don't know if they're ever going to be able to, like, this is going to stall their career"? Or
Yeah.
is your reaction like, "That's really tough, but I think that they can go on to something better"? Like, that alone will tell you, like, where do you fall on sort of the growth fixed mindset, at least on that particular topic.
There's two things you brought up there that I think are pretty interesting. One, I want to make sure I call this out. I would remix your iPhone phrase and I would say no one got fired for making the iPhone when the Samsungs already existed. That's probably where I would start. Android over iPhone. That would start there. But after that, I love where you're going with looking at what's happening a lot in our world today right now. Is just the open to work symbol on that LinkedIn, right? If anyone is posting that open to work, I think they're already speaking to the idea of growth mindset, right? Like once they put that open to work in there, which I didn't know people had like feelings about putting that in there. Like, oh, I just lost my job and I have to tell people that. And now they feel less than because of something that happened in the market that has nothing to do with their skill level. It's just like, oh, this is a thing that's happening to me or in and around me. But if they were to stay in that space, you can't get another job, right? If you don't get in that space where you're like, no, it happened. That was maybe a relationship that didn't make it to the eventual end that I maybe wanted to see. But now I have to go out there and make new opportunities for myself. And I think right there, when you start to get in that space. So I love the idea of saying, hey, how do I notice it? I think if I add to that, it's listening to how you speak to yourself. Right. One of the things that we call out in like the exercises that we might do in the training is saying, hey, can you hear your fixed mindset voice? We're not saying that you can't have a fixed mindset. We're just saying that it slows you down. So can you hear yourself saying, right, in that experience, hey, if I lost a job, yeah, you can have a fixed mindset for a day. We'll give you a little time to say, dang, this sucks. I don't know if I'll be able to find a job. All that stuff can happen for a day or two. But after that, you got to switch. You got to be able to say, okay, I know if I stay here, I'm slowed. But if I speed it up and say, hey, I can find better. Now, all of a sudden, you give yourself an opportunity to really get in there and look and pay attention and focus your mind towards something different. And it's not, I don't want to be Pollyannic and make it like, oh, it's always grand and great. No, that happens. We get in this space where the fixed mindset kind of can speak louder than the growth, but it's about being able to hear it, name it, identify it, and then say, I'm going to switch. I'm going to determine now that there's a different way for me to think and go after that.
Well, and I think the other piece is having a growth mindset doesn't mean things are going to be easy. It's actually probably the opposite. It
Right.
means you're open to doing the work, right? And I think the other piece is, do you collectively, any of us, see failure or see setback as an end or an opportunity for something new, right? Like, I've coached a lot of people. I've been in a job search myself and I've coached a lot of people. So a job ended. Are you going out and looking for the exact same thing because the only way that you can be successful is by doing the exact same thing? Or do you take a step back? And by the way, this is not easy.
Right.
Take a step back and say, like, what are my skills? How are they transferable? What do I want to do? And I've seen so many people do that and actually come to something great, right? Like, part of me starting my own business was taking a step back and saying, like, I have these skills. I don't have the skill to run a business. I've never done that. I can learn that.
Right.
Right. Like, I have a business coach right now helping me to figure out how to run the business because I know how to do the things. So I think it's that idea of cultivating a growth mindset is making sure, and not, to your point, not be Pollyanna on it.
Yeah.
Be like, super, lost the job, failed, like whatever ended. But take it for what it is and say, like, all right, what did I learn and how do I pivot that to the future? And I think that's a really big part of cultivating a growth mindset.
I think so. And you said the word pivot. So I'm going to use that as a perfect time to segue into our third and possibly our final point before we get to some calls to action. You said, right, in our one of our questions was, how do we deal with people that don't have a growth mindset? So we're not going to name him, but our friend who made that post that told you basically if you didn't start investing at 20, you're screwed, right? How do we deal with someone who is approaching us with that kind of a fixed mindset? What are we doing there?
I think one of the key things to think about is it's situational, and what is your investment in that situation? And I say that because a lot of times where we will encounter this is at work.
Okay.
So let's say, for example, the person who has a fixed mindset is a direct report of yours who's like, oh my God, that presentation went terribly. People are going to think I'm stupid. I'm never going to be like, I can't do this again. Great. Well, let's actually take a step back, do a hindsighting. What went well? Where did you get stuck? What are you going to do differently next time? And help someone pivot. That's a way where you can really just start to create the practices and behaviors to help someone over whom you have authority. They are someone who you work with on a regular basis, and really set the expectation by not freaking out yourself and being like, yeah, you blew that, like career over, right? Like, you set the tone.
Yeah.
I think the other thing though that I hear a lot, and I've seen this a lot, is like, what if your boss or your boss's boss doesn't have a growth mindset?
Okay.
So I worked with a company that was quite honestly the longest year of my life, where I didn't have the language for it at the time, but I will tell you that CEO did not have a growth mindset. I watched people get fired left, right, and center. I would see someone get fired to an SVP role, or get promoted, I'm sorry, to an SVP role, and were fired within 2 months.
Yeah.
I saw someone who like missed an ordering deadline and was fired the next day. Like, that is a fixed mindset that's very different, right? So I was like, I'm not changing that. I'm getting out. For
Yeah.
most people, it's not quite so extreme. But like, if you've got a boss with a fixed mindset, you can be the person who says like, hey, I don't think that presentation went well for me. Here is what I learned. I think this is what did go well. Here is where I think it went off the rails for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
This is what I'm going to do differently next time. What do you think? Like, do the diagnosis yourself and put them in the right frame of mind. You're not trying to change them for life, but you need to have them in a different mind space for you. So that would be my recommendation.
I love where you bring it there and saying, hey, you can coach up, and you can coach up with those kinds of questions. I think those three questions they're a universal set. It's what went well. You starting off with positive right there. You're giving yourself a chance to have some time to reflect on success, right? I think it's important to study success. So when you win or when you're doing good, you want to study that. You also get an opportunity to find out where you maybe got stuck. Study the failure too, right? Where did I have a hard time? Where was it sticky? Where didn't it feel good? And then finally, you start to plan for your way forward. If you're working with leaders, they're going to hear that language, whether they know it or not. They're going to understand, oh, this person had some successes. They're clear on where they failed, and they've already started to plan for next. That is growth mindset in a nutshell. It's saying, I didn't get there, but I can, and here's how I'll do it. That proactiveness is going to help you in that leadership space. I think also in your personal life, this is a great set of questions that you can start to instill in family. Is this something from my first anniversary? My wife and I sat down and I was like, hey, I'd like us to build a habit of asking these questions to ourselves at minimum at our anniversary. So when we sit down year after year, we can kind of say, hey, what went well this year? Where did we get stuck? And how do we make sure we can make it the next 5 years? And what can we do to do that? What actions can we put into play? With my children, I'm starting to try to figure out how to do that too. Hey, you did a really good job in swimming today. What felt good? Did you have a hard time with any of the things? And are you excited for the next one? So even at 3, I can start to build this language of a growth mindset so that he can start to understand that trying is important, right? The failure is okay. We can study it and we can get better in the future. So all those things are things that I would do if I had to work with someone who didn't have a fixed mindset. And also, there's an unfollow button on Instagram. So this,
Yeah, there's that. For sure.
so any of the negativity we don't want, we just no, I'm just kidding. But it's good to be able to call it out and see it when it's there.
Well, and when I think back to like why I was so triggered by his post, because I think it's a dangerous thing to say to people. Like, imagine if you said to your son, oh, didn't do so great in swimming. Guess we're not swimming anymore, right? Like, you build that mindset. And to say that to someone in their 20s, the thing that I I am really grateful for, number one, my cluelessness in my 20s in a lot of ways, and the fact that I learned so much. I was in grad school in my 20s in England. I had no plan. I was like, well, I'm gonna have to come back and do something. And literally, I remember this so specifically. I was sitting in the computer lab, because that's how old I am. I was sitting in the computer lab and I got an email from a friend of mine from college who was like, hey, in September, I'm moving to Boston. I need a roommate. I know you don't have a plan yet. Do you want to come? And I literally, this is pure cluelessness. I was like, I think I took 3 minutes and I was like, yep. I said, you get the apartment and I'll come.
Look at that.
I came back from England. I spent 2 months finishing my dissertation. I arrived, the first time I was ever in Boston was the day I moved in. I had less than $300 in my bank account, but that also has been the foundation of the risks I've taken over the course of my career, because I did
Yeah.
that in my 20s when it was fairly low stakes.
Yeah.
Because, like, look, the reality is my rent wasn't that high. If this doesn't work out, I can go do something else. But now I've made much bigger decisions, like taken bigger risks
Yeah.
in, like, as I've gotten older. And that is the root, like, it's because
You
I did some of the
you
things I
needed
did.
those learnings, right? You needed to be able to look back and then said, why would I do that, right? To be able to have the learnings that you have now. I think there's a space to shoot our Instagram friend a little bit of bail here. One of the things I think overarching, he's saying, get to know yourself. If you break down the three pieces of the things he's calling out, is like, hey, get to know yourself. The earlier you get to know yourself, the better off you'll be in the future. And I would say, I would agree with that line. The other thing I would say is that if you're in your 20s and you read that, don't believe that part, because you still have time. If I read that at 28 and said, shucks, I just spent 8 years not really knowing what I was going to do and not figuring out, and guess what? It's kind of over for me now. That's rough. There's a Biggie Small line. It's one of my favorite lines. And one of my buddies used to say it to each other all the time. But the line was, being broke at 30 gave a brother the chills. Right? Like, the idea of when I'm in my 20s, if I'm broke at 30, like, but I was broke at 30. So I know. So when I got to 30 and I had those chills for real, it was understanding. But I didn't say that, oh, I didn't make it. I don't have it. I can't have success later. It was now that I was able to say, okay, I learned from all the things I did in my 20s. And now I can put into practice some of the things I learned. So there's still time, and that's important. And now that we've been able to discuss a couple of things here, right? We've been able to talk a little bit about the idea of growth mindset. We've been talking about how you can cultivate a growth mindset, and also how you deal with people who might not have the growth mindset before they can weigh you down. We told you what to do. We want to give you some call to actions here that you can take with you as things you can put in action right now to help you in your growth mindset journey. So Beth, you want to go ahead and give the first call to action here?
Yeah, it's twofold. So I think the first part of it is that noticing piece that I mentioned. Like, the more that, we don't have to make ourselves our own lab experiments, but the more that we notice our behaviors and notice what's behind them, like the why of, like, why did I like, what really, when I read that post, I was like, triggered. And I was like, so I immediately texted it to you, and then I was like, okay, why do I feel this way? And I kind of got underneath it, right? So noticing is really important, and that's going to serve you well in a lot of places in your life. And then I think the other call to action is, take a few minutes, step back, and get clear on your relationship with failure. Do you, when something goes wrong, when you don't do something well, because that happens to all of us, do you look at that as a failure, or do you look at that as an opportunity to learn? And it's really important to understand that about ourselves, both because it impacts, like, our daily lives, the way that we feel about ourselves, but it also is going to seep out into the people around us. Whether you're leading a team and it comes through as like, oh, that was a really, didn't go great presentation, or or your kids who, like, yeah, not the best swim meet, but so I think getting really clear on your relationship with failure, and trying to see, like, how is failure an opportunity to learn, and how do you shift your thought process on that, I think is really important. Those are my two
Yeah, culture. Call to I was gonna say call to action. No, culture is caught, it's not taught, right? So I could say whatever I want to say, but in the things that I do, in the ways that I act, that's what people pick up. And it's important. Growth mindset is definitely one of those things. The more you have that growth mindedness to you, you'll notice and start to see people repeating the things you say because they actually believe what you believe, and that's important. I would say the call to action that we want to express here is the idea of accessing and leveraging the power of yet. In Dr. Dweck's book, there's a study that they talk about when they were able to grade two different classrooms of children. And graded one set of children with the same grades that we know the natural way, which is A's, B's, and C's, right? And it's kind of a deterministic ending. And they gave another classroom the grade of yet. And when they were able to look at the two, the kids that got a grade that was like not yet, they grew more. The reason why was yet told them that there was still opportunity, there was still time. They would go back to the test and try to figure out where they failed or where they could get it better. We want to get in a space of making the same thing for ourselves. So instead of saying, hey, I didn't become a millionaire in my 30s, maybe you say, I'm not a millionaire yet, right? Because it could still happen. There's time. My business it wasn't successful last year, but you could also say my business isn't successful yet. That's giving yourself the idea that, hey, it's going to get there. I didn't lose the 10 pounds I wanted to. Nope, I didn't lose those pounds yet. All of a sudden, you're seeing a way that the possibility is still there. There's still something for me to work for and put effort towards, and that becomes really important. So access that power, leverage it, use the word yet in your vocabulary, let other people hear you say it, and they'll grow and follow with that too. So this brings us to the conclusion of our talk today. We're so excited to be having these. We're getting into a little bit of a rhythm here with having them and getting more comfortable with each other and with these conversations. And we had these conversations all the time. In our pre-production, we talked for like 20 minutes just about this same thing. So we're getting more comfortable with sharing them with you. If you'd like to hear us share more of these or things that you want us to talk about, we want you to go ahead and email us. We'll put the email in the end of this so you can find it as well, so you can reach out to us. And Beth, where can they find you when you're not sitting here with me on this podcast?
Yeah, excuse me. You can find me on LinkedIn, either under my name, Beth Messich, or under Beth Messich Coaching and Consulting, or at Beth at bethmessich.com is my email, or my website, bethmessich.com.
There you go. You can find me at the same places. LinkedIn under Greggy Amisial. You can find me there. I'm on Insta too, Greggy For Real Cycle. That's one of the places you can find us as well. And Activating You on Instagram as well. So a bunch of places you can find us. If you have any questions or comments you want to leave us, please do that. We appreciated being here with you today. We can't wait for our next time to sit down and share with you. Definitely give us some feedback. Let us know how we're doing, because we'll use that feedback, right, and access our growth mindset. If this wasn't your favorite episode, it's not your favorite episode yet. See what we just did there? This was great. Peace out, everybody. Bye.